Welcome everyone. This is the MasterClass. My name is Patricknazareth. I have around 30 years of teaching experience and I'm here to help you with your doubts, should you have any. Today we look at the chapter We Are Not Afraid to Die If We Can All Be Together, written by Gordon Cook and Alan East. Gordon Cook, at the age of 37, took his wife, his 7-year-old daughter, his 6-year-old son, sailing around the world. He was supposed to complete this trip in 3 years. Instead, he faced many hardships and it took him almost 17 years to complete. He faced a very strong examination of his seamanship and his navigation. Since he did this beautifully, he was presented the Lady Swartling Award. He was awarded the prize in 1977. He received it very late, only in 2009. Imagine a world where your parents tell you to stop studying and take you around the world on a boat. Would you like it? What would happen? The author, Gordon Cook, starts off with the background. He's a 37-year-old businessman. He suddenly decides to sell everything he owns, buy a beautiful boat called the Wave Walker, and sail around the world. Why did he do this? Simply because his name was Cook, and Captain James Cook was the first man to sail around the world. He was no relation, he only had the same surname. So he set out. He had a fairly uneventful voyage. He came all the way to South Africa. He took on a couple of sailors because he knew the seas were going to get rough, and he sailed away. He did encounter stormy seas, but Christmas and New Year of the year 1976 was by and large uneventful. Storms were weathered and he continued sailing. However, on the 2nd of the new year, 1977, the storm that hit them was so sudden and so bad that they almost capsized. A monster wave hit their boat, almost turned the boat over. However, the boat righted itself once the wave had passed. The author himself, Gordon Cook, was thrown overboard because he was the one who was at the wheel at that time. He was piloting the boat, and he was only saved because he had attached a line. A line is a rope around his body. It's called a sea line, that is attached to the boat, to your body, that helps you. You fall into the sea and you use the rope to get back, which is what he did. He had several injuries, not the least of which was that he cracked his ribs, he broke some teeth, and of course bloodied all over. Inside the boat, they were more fortunate inasmuch as there were not so major injuries except for his daughter, who had what she called a bump on her head. His wife came up to tell him that, listen, the boat has been holed, there are many holes in the boat, and now water is coming in. So if water comes into a boat, the boat will sink. If the boat sinks, they die. It's as simple as that. Asked her to take the wheel. He rushed down. He started the pumps. What is a pump? You all seen the small pumps that are used to pump water into apartments, to pump water into houses. Those sort of pumps are used in boats to pump the water out. The pump started working, and he, the author, grabbed waterproof canvas, nails, a hammer, did not even have the time to worry about his children, and went to work on the boat immediately, patching up all the holes so that water would stop entering. It was very hard work for the next 2 days. They were forever pumping water. The main pumps which were on the deck of the boat had been washed away along with the sails and other equipment. However, by luck, he remembered he had one more pump, so he started that up. In fact, it was almost 2 days before they were able to have another meal. Radio calls for help were frequent, but because they were in an isolated part of the ocean, their calls for help went unanswered. They realized that nobody was coming for them. But however, they had managed to get most of the water out of the boat. When they checked up on the boat, they realized that one side was completely stove in other words, completely destroyed, right from the bottom to the top, and water would enter through that. They had no choice. They abandoned their original destination, which was Australia, and they went looking for 2 islands. One, which is given in your book, Isle Amsterdam, and the other was St. Paul's. These were hundreds of kilometers away, but they tried their level best to navigate to them. Remember, there was no sun. It was overcast. There was a storm brewing. So basically, he navigated by his past position. Luckily for him, storm conditions temporarily stopped, allowing him to get a reading, allowing him to understand where he was, and he adjusted his course accordingly. It was touch and go whether or not the boat would sink, but somehow or the other, he kept it afloat. He turned the side, which was okay, into the waves. In other words, waves flow in one direction, so that the broken side was protected from the waves. These waves were hitting the side of the boat, which was whole, which was not broken, and somehow or the other they saved. A time came when the author and his wife, they held hands together, thought to themselves that they would not even survive, since they couldn't use sails. In any case, the mainsail had been swept away by the storm. With the shortened sail, no engine, the engine having been destroyed by the wave, they kept on going, slowly but surely, going towards the island that they thought was in the distance. He thought that he would reach the Isle Amsterdam by 5, and when time passed, he realized he was not reaching there. He got worried. Around 6, his children came and told him, "Papa, you reached." So he reached it a little after 6, which was actually an outstanding example of his seamanship. When he reached the Isle of Amsterdam, people who were there helped him, looked after his daughter, looked after his son. The danger had passed. He had time to reflect on the crisis and how each one of them had worked their way through it. How he himself had patched up the boat, how he himself had navigated the boat kilometers and kilometers of empty sea just to 2 islands, which were very, very small. How his wife, without complaint, had steered the boat while he was busy bailing out water and fixing up the boat. How his daughter, who was horribly injured during the wave, she hit her head so badly that her eyes became black, and later on she had to have 6 minor operations, that too without anesthetic. How his son displays enormous bravery. Jonathan says that we aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together. How his 2 sailors, Larry and Herb, that he had hired in South Africa, worked extremely hard, always cheerful, always optimistic, never complaining. Gordon Cook was very, very happy with everyone for their bravery, for their courage, for their ability to stand together and be counted as one. Who are the characters in this story then? Firstly, the narrator, Gordon Cook, who is a 37-year-old businessman who has a dream to sail around the world. Mary Cook, his wife, who shares her husband's dreams and goes with him. Suzanne Cook, the daughter, who is very, very selfless, even to the extent of hiding her own pain to avoid her parents worrying about her. The son, Jonathan, who is 6 years old, displays enormous bravery and emotional intelligence. Finally, of course, the 2 crew members, Larry and Herb, cheerful, optimistic, hard workers. What are the settings for this story then? We move from England, and the main setting is in the southern Indian Ocean, which is known for powerful storms. The time, December and January 1976 and 1977. And of course, the place where they were rescued, Isle Amsterdam, a tiny volcanic island with 28 inhabitants. What are the literary devices used? The first person narrative. Since it is told from the father's point of view, we are immediately drawn into the story. The imagery that is used, like a torrent of green and white water, or waves as high as the mast, or a black cloud, these help us understand how difficult the seas were. There is the suspense, the tension. We don't know whether the family is going to survive, whether all of them are going to be alive, whether or not they'll be able to reach the island. The dialogue, each conversation brings out something important. Most especially the way Jonathan says that we aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together. These emphasize and create an emotional bond between the family and between us who are reading it. Then there is something called juxtaposition, where you create a contrast, extreme danger and family. It's very emotional, very gripping. Metaphors and similes are used. There are phrases like "toss me around the deck like a rag doll." How are islands described? They are so small, they're described as pinpricks in the vast ocean. This helps us get an idea of what went on. And finally, the pacing. The story is written beautifully. There is action, and then suddenly the action stops. Everything becomes quiet, allowing us to reflect on what happened, allowing us to get into the emotion of the moment, allowing us to get touched by everything before the action restarts. What are the themes of this particular chapter then? The most important: family, unity, and love. They faced a crisis, and because of the strong family ties and the love they had for each other. The very title of the story is a line spoken by Jonathan, Gordon's son, who said he wouldn't mind dying just as long as they were all together. It also has courage and resilience, how the family, how the crew stood against all the odds, stood against all the dangers that they faced and came out triumphant. The children and their bravery. Both the children, remember, they are 6 years old and 7 years old. They came out as very brave. The girl, Suzanne, hurt herself so badly, but she hid her serious injury from her father since she knew that he should be more worried about the boat. And the boy, he was not afraid to die, knowing that if he did die, he would face it with his entire family. Another theme is how nature and humans interact, how they are pitted against each other, how in front of the raw power of nature, we are nothing. Hope, perseverance, selflessness. Hoping against hope to survive, trying their level best without giving up, and thinking only of each other. Help this family, help the crew with them come through this very testing time where they could all have died. That's it then, the end of the chapter. I do hope I have been able to help. If I have, please remember to like, subscribe and share. There would be others out there who would need our help. Thank you so much for watching.